Have you ever wondered what happened to the Roman Empire? We all know the stories of Julius Caesar, the Colosseum, and the legions that conquered the known world. But the story doesn't end with the fall of Rome. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. This is the story of an empire that refused to die, a city that became the envy of the world, and a legacy that shaped our modern age. This is the story of the Byzantine Empire. Our journey begins in the 3rd century AD. The once mighty Roman Empire is teetering on the brink of collapse. It's a time of crisis, plagued by civil wars, economic disaster, and constant barbarian invasions. The empire is too vast, too unwieldy to be governed by a single man in a single city. It's in this chaotic world that a figure of immense ambition and vision rises to power: Constantine the Great. Constantine understood that the old Rome, with its pagan traditions and strategic vulnerabilities, was a relic of the past. He needed something new. A new capital, a new center of power, and a new faith to unify his fractured empire. He had a revolutionary idea to build a new Rome. In 324 AD, after defeating his rivals and becoming the sole ruler of the Roman world, Constantine chose a location that was nothing short of strategic genius. He selected an ancient Greek city called Byzantium, a place perfectly situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It controlled the vital trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It was a natural fortress, surrounded by water on 3 sides, making it almost impregnable. For 6 years, an army of workers transformed the old town into a magnificent metropolis. They built massive walls, forums, palaces, and a grand hippodrome for chariot races. Constantine stripped ancient temples across the empire of their treasures to adorn his new capital. But most importantly, he built churches. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, and his new city would be the heart of this new Christian empire. In 330 AD, the city was officially consecrated and renamed Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It was a declaration to the world. A new era had dawned. For a time, the Roman Empire was ruled from 2 centers, the old Rome in the west and the new Constantinople in the east. But the division between the 2 halves grew deeper with each passing year. The Western Roman Empire, facing relentless pressure from Germanic tribes and suffering from internal decay, continued its slow, painful decline. The East, on the other hand, was wealthier, more urbanized, and better defended. It was able to weather the storm. Then came the year 476 AD. This is the date historians traditionally mark as the end of the Western Roman Empire. The last emperor in the West, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The imperial insignia were sent to the emperor in Constantinople, a symbolic gesture acknowledging that the true seat of Roman power now lay in the east. While the West fragmented into a patchwork of successor kingdoms, plunging Europe into what we now call the Dark Ages, the Eastern Roman Empire stood firm. It wasn't a successor state. For its people, it was simply the Roman Empire. They called themselves Romans, Romaioi in Greek, and they saw their emperor as the direct successor to Augustus and Constantine. This empire, which we modern historians call the Byzantine Empire to distinguish it from its earlier Latin-speaking phase, would not only survive but thrive. It would preserve the priceless knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, blending it with Christian theology and Eastern artistic influences to create a brilliant and unique civilization. From its magnificent capital, the Byzantine Empire would carry the torch of Roman civilization for another 1,000 years. It would face down Persians, Arabs, Slavs, and Crusaders, creating a legacy of law, art, and religion that would profoundly influence both the Islamic world and the European Renaissance. The fall of Rome in the West was not the end of the story. It was the moment the spotlight shifted east to the golden city of Constantinople, the new Rome. This is just the beginning of the Byzantine saga, the age of Justinian and his audacious dream of restoring the glory of Rome. If you thought the story of the Eastern Roman Empire was just a slow decline, get ready to be amazed. In the 6th century, a man of humble origins ascended the throne in Constantinople. His name was Justinian. Alongside him was one of history's most remarkable women, his wife, Empress Theodora. Together, this power couple would preside over an era so brilliant, so ambitious, it's remembered as the empire's first golden age. Justinian wasn't content with merely ruling the East. He looked west to the lands once held by Caesar and Augustus and saw not lost territory, but a birthright waiting to be reclaimed. His dream was nothing less than the Renovatio Imperii, the restoration of the Roman Empire. To turn this dream into reality, Justinian needed a military genius, and he found one in his general Belisarius. Imagine a general so skilled, so daring, that he could win battles against overwhelming odds. That was Belisarius. Justinian dispatched him on a series of breathtakingly ambitious campaigns. First, his sights were set on North Africa, held by the Vandal kingdom. In a lightning-fast campaign, Belisarius shattered the Vandal forces and restored the province to Roman rule after a century of separation. The people of Constantinople celebrated as if Scipio Africanus himself had returned. But North Africa was just the beginning. The ultimate prize was Italy, the very heartland of the old empire, now under the rule of the Ostrogoths. This campaign would be far harder, a brutal, 2-decade-long war that would ravage the Italian peninsula. Belisarius and his successor Narses fought tooth and nail, capturing key cities like Ravenna and, most symbolically, Rome itself. For a fleeting moment, the Mediterranean once again felt like a Roman lake. The dream, it seemed, was becoming reality. The Roman eagle flew once more from the Pillars of Hercules to the plains of Mesopotamia. But Justinian's ambition wasn't limited to the battlefield. He understood that a great empire is built on more than just military might. It's built on law and order. For centuries, Roman law had become a confusing, contradictory mess of decrees, senatorial opinions, and scholarly writings stretching back 1,000 years. It was a legal labyrinth. Justinian tasked his brilliant legal scholar, Tribonian, with a monumental project: to collect, edit, and organize this entire body of law into a single coherent system. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis *, or the body of civil law, known to history as the Justinian Code. This wasn't just a spring cleaning of old laws. It was a revolutionary act that synthesized a millennium of Roman legal thought. The code was divided into parts. The Codex *, which compiled imperial decrees. The Digest *, a massive collection of writings from great Roman jurists. The Institutes *, a textbook for law students. And the Novellae *, which included Justinian's own new laws. This comprehensive work would become the bedrock of legal systems across Western Europe for centuries to come. When you study law today, you are, in many ways, standing on the shoulders of Justinian and his legal scholars. It was a gift of order and reason to a chaotic world. While Justinian was restoring Roman law and Roman lands, he was also determined to make Constantinople the undeniable center of the Christian world. He embarked on a building program so vast it would reshape the city's skyline forever. And at its heart was a project of divine ambition. The city's main cathedral, the Hagia Sophia, or Holy Wisdom, had been burned down during riots. Justinian saw this as an opportunity not just to rebuild, but to create something the world had never seen before. He hired two brilliant minds, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, who were not traditional architects, but masters of geometry and physics. They proposed a radical design, a massive central dome that would seem to float above the main hall, as if suspended from heaven by a golden chain. For 5 years, 10,000 workers toiled. The scale was unprecedented. The finest marbles were brought from across the empire, green from Thessaly, yellow from Africa, white from the Bosphorus. When it was finally completed in 537, Justinian himself walked inside, looked up at the immense light-filled space, and is said to have whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." The Hagia Sophia was more than a church, it was a statement. It was the architectural embodiment of Byzantine power, faith, and technical genius, a wonder of the medieval world. For a time, it must have seemed like Justinian was invincible. The empire was expanding, the law was codified, and a divine dome graced his capital. The Roman world, fractured for so long, seemed to be stitching itself back together under his masterful hand. The dream of restoration was within his grasp. But history and nature had other plans. An invisible and terrifying enemy was about to emerge from the east, an enemy that no army could defeat and no wall could stop. In the year 541, the first reports emerged from the port of Pelusium in Egypt. A mysterious and deadly sickness was spreading. It was the bubonic plague. Carried by fleas on black rats that traveled along the very trade routes that made the empire rich, the plague spread with horrifying speed. By 542, it had reached the bustling, crowded streets of Constantinople. This was the first recorded pandemic of bubonic plague, now known as the Plague of Justinian. The chronicler Procopius, an eyewitness, described the terrifying symptoms, fevers, chills, and the telltale swellings, or buboes, that gave the disease its name. At its peak, the plague was killing thousands of people in Constantinople every single day. The city ran out of burial space. Bodies were piled in towers, on boats set adrift in the sea, or simply left in the streets. The stench of death hung over the magnificent capital. Even Emperor Justinian himself fell ill, though he would eventually recover. The plague raged across the empire for years, returning in waves. Its impact was catastrophic. Modern estimates suggest that it may have killed as much as a third to half of the empire's population. The economy collapsed. The countryside was depopulated, leaving fields untended. The army was decimated, its ranks thinned not by enemy swords, but by disease. The ambitious reconquests in Italy and Africa suddenly became impossible to hold. The resources and manpower were simply gone. The dream of a restored Roman Empire died not in the heat of battle, but in the cold grip of pestilence. Justinian would rule for many more years, a tireless administrator to the end, but the world he ruled was a shadow of what it had been. The golden age had been cut short. The plague of Justinian was a demographic and psychological blow from which the Mediterranean world would not recover for centuries. It marked a true turning point, the end of the classical era and the beginning of the darker, more fragmented period we call the early Middle Ages. The dream of restoration was a beautiful one, but it was ultimately shattered, leaving the Byzantine Empire to face a new and uncertain future, forever changed by the memory of what could have been. It's a powerful reminder of how even the greatest ambitions can be humbled by forces beyond our control. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe. The wheel of fortune is always turning, and for Rome's eastern heir, the 7th century brought a storm unlike any it had ever faced. An existential threat was brewing in the deserts of Arabia, a force that would not just challenge the empire, but threatened to erase it from the map entirely. Imagine being in Constantinople around the year 630. You've just witnessed Emperor Heraclius achieve a seemingly impossible victory against the mighty Persian Empire, reclaiming the true cross and restoring the empire's eastern borders. There's a sense of triumph, of divine favor. But this victory lap would be tragically short-lived. From the south, a new unified force, galvanized by the nascent faith of Islam, exploded onto the world stage. The Arab conquests had begun. The speed and scale of this new challenge were staggering. The Byzantine armies, exhausted from their long war with Persia, were simply unprepared. At the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, a decisive Arab victory shattered Byzantine control over the Levant. One by one, the ancient, wealthy provinces began to fall. Syria, the heartland of early Christianity, was lost. Then came the unthinkable. Egypt, the breadbasket of the empire, the source of Constantinople's grain and immense wealth, also fell. Within a few short decades, the entire southern rim of the Mediterranean, from Alexandria to Carthage in North Africa, was gone. This wasn't just a loss of territory. It was a dismemberment. The empire was severed from its richest lands, its most ancient cities, and a huge portion of its population. It was as if the Roman Empire had lost Gaul, Spain, and North Africa all over again, but this time in a single generation. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was now a contested frontier. The empire was backed into a corner, reduced to its core territories of Anatolia and the Balkans. Survival itself was now the only goal. With the heartlands of the Middle East and North Africa under the control of the rapidly expanding caliphate, the ultimate prize came into view: Constantinople itself. The city of Constantine, the queen of cities, the impregnable fortress. The Arabs knew that to truly break the empire, they had to take its heart. In 674, a massive Arab fleet and army arrived at the gates of Constantinople, beginning the first great siege of the city. For 4 long years, the city held. This was a testament to one of the ancient world's greatest engineering marvels, the Theodosian walls. These were not just single walls, but a multi-layered defense system of moats, outer walls, and massive inner walls dotted with towers. For centuries, they had repelled every foe, but the Arabs were persistent, returning year after year. The fate of Christendom, it seemed, hung by a thread. And then, the Byzantines unleashed their secret weapon, a terrifying, almost magical substance that could burn on water. Greek fire. Picture this. From bronze siphons mounted on the Byzantine ships, jets of liquid fire would shoot out, engulfing the enemy's wooden vessels. The fire was inextinguishable by water. In fact, water seemed to make it burn even more fiercely. It stuck to ships and sailors, creating scenes of pure horror and panic. The psychological impact was immense. This wasn't just a weapon. It was divine wrath, a technological terror that shattered the morale of the besieging navy. Thanks to the walls and the miracle of Greek fire, the siege was broken. The empire had survived. You would think that after staring into the abyss, the empire would rally together, united against the common foe. But this is Byzantine history, and nothing is ever that simple. Just as the external threat began to stabilize, the empire turned on itself in a bitter century-long internal conflict. The issue? Pictures, specifically religious icons. This period is known as iconoclasm, literally the smashing of images. It began in 726 when Emperor Leo III, a strong military leader who had defended the empire from another massive Arab siege, decided that the veneration of icons, holy images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints was a form of idolatry. He argued that the empire's recent misfortunes were a sign of God's displeasure with this practice. So, he ordered the icons destroyed. Imperial soldiers marched into churches, tearing down mosaics, whitewashing frescoes, and burning painted wooden panels. This act tore Byzantine society in two. On one side were the iconoclasts, the image smashers, led by the emperor and parts of the army, who believed they were purifying the faith. On the other side were the iconodules, the image venerators, led by monks and the majority of the populace, who saw icons not as idols, but as windows into heaven, aids to prayer that had been part of their tradition for centuries. The struggle was brutal. Monks were persecuted, monasteries were seized, and people were punished for hiding their precious icons. It was a culture war and a civil war rolled into one, fought not with swords on a battlefield, but in churches, homes, and the streets of Constantinople. For over a century, the policy swung back and forth as different emperors took the throne. First, the icons were banned, then restored by an empress, then banned again. This internal division was incredibly damaging. While the empire was tearing itself apart over theology, its enemies were still at the gates. It diverted resources, attention, and manpower away from the critical frontiers. It was a self-inflicted wound at the worst possible time. Finally, in the year 843, on a day still celebrated in the Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy, the Empress Theodora permanently restored the restored the veneration of icons, ending the conflict once and for all. The empire had survived its long, dark night of the soul. Think about what the empire had endured. It lost over half its territory and wealth. Its capital was besieged by the most powerful force of the age. It was then ripped apart by a century of religious civil war. By all conventional logic, the Byzantine Empire should have collapsed, but it didn't. It held on. It adapted. It became a smaller, tougher, more militarized, and intensely religious society. It had been forged anew in the fires of crisis. This was the empire of survival. And its story was far from over. Having survived the storm, the Byzantines were about to claw their way back, leading to a new period of resurgence and conquest that we'll explore in our next episode. We navigated the turbulent waters of the iconoclast controversy. Today, we're sailing into a period of sunshine and splendor, the Macedonian Golden Age. This isn't just a recovery. It's a full-blown renaissance, a time when the empire roars back to life, more powerful and more culturally vibrant than it had been in centuries. So, buckle up, because we're about to witness Byzantium at its absolute peak. After the internal strife of the previous centuries, a new dynasty, the Macedonians, takes the helm. And what a change they bring. Think of it like a company that was on the brink of collapse suddenly getting a visionary new CEO. The empire's fortunes are about to skyrocket. This period, stretching from the late 9th to the early 11th century, is often called the Second Byzantine Golden Age, and for good reason. It's a time of military might, economic prosperity, and an incredible cultural flowering. So, what does this revival look like on the ground? Well, for starters, the military gets a massive upgrade. The army and navy are reorganized, re-equipped, and retrained, transforming them into the most formidable fighting force in the known world. Byzantine generals, who are often the emperors themselves, start pushing back the empire's enemies on all fronts. Territories that had been lost for generations in the east to the Arabs are slowly but surely reconquered. The frontiers aren't just being defended anymore. They're expanding. This military success brings immense wealth back to Constantinople. Plunder from successful campaigns, reopened trade routes, and a booming agricultural economy fill the imperial coffers. And what do the Macedonians do with all this cash? They invested in culture, art, and knowledge. This is the era of the Macedonian Renaissance. Mosaics become more intricate and expressive. Churches are built on a grander scale, and the city of Constantinople becomes a dazzling jewel, the envy of the world. Imagine walking through the capital, seeing shimmering gold mosaics and stunning new architecture rising against the skyline. It's a statement of power and piety, all rolled into one. One of the most crucial aspects of this cultural boom is the preservation of the past. Scholars in Constantinople pore over ancient manuscripts, painstakingly copying and compiling classical Greek texts. Philosophy, science, mathematics, history, the works of Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and Thucydides are saved from being lost to time. Without the efforts of these Byzantine scribes, our understanding of the ancient world would be vastly poorer. They are the unsung heroes of Western civilization, the librarians of a continent, ensuring that the flame of classical knowledge wasn't extinguished during Europe's so-called Dark Ages. This intellectual fervor isn't just about looking backward. It fuels new innovations and a highly educated civil service that makes the empire run like a well-oiled machine. The pinnacle of this era of military dominance comes with a man whose nickname alone tells you he wasn't messing around. Emperor Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer. Basil is a fascinating figure, ascetic, single-minded, and utterly ruthless. He spends almost his entire reign on campaign, living in the saddle with his troops. His primary obsession? The final subjugation of the Bulgarian Empire, a powerful rival in the Balkans that had challenged Byzantium for centuries. Basil's wars against the Bulgarians are brutal and relentless, lasting for decades. The climax comes after the Battle of Cleidion in 1014. According to the chroniclers, Basil captures 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers. In a chilling act of psychological warfare, he has them all blinded, leaving just one man in every 100 with a single eye to lead the rest back to their Tsar. The story goes that the Bulgarian Tsar, Samuel, died of a heart attack upon seeing his mutilated army. Whether the story is entirely accurate or not, it cemented Basil's terrifying reputation and broke the back of Bulgarian resistance. By 1018, the entire Bulgarian Empire is annexed, and the Byzantine frontier reaches the Danube River for the first time in 400 years. Under Basil II, the Byzantine Empire reaches its greatest territorial extent since the days of Justinian. From southern Italy to the Euphrates River in the east, and all the way down to the Levant, the double-headed eagle flies supreme. He leaves the empire incredibly wealthy, secure, and respected or feared by all its neighbors. He is, without a doubt, one of the most effective emperors in Roman history, a true soldier emperor who dedicated his life to the state. But the influence of the Macedonian era extends far beyond the battlefield. One of its most lasting legacies happens not through conquest, but through conversion. During this period, Byzantine missionaries traveled north, into the lands of the Kiev and Rus, a confederation of Slavic peoples centered around modern-day Ukraine and Russia. The ruler of the Rus, Prince Vladimir of Kiev, is looking to unite his people under a single religion. Legend has it he sent envoys to investigate the major faiths of the world. The envoys who visited Constantinople are utterly spellbound. They attend a service at the Hagia Sophia and report back to Vladimir, saying, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We only know that God dwells there among men." Convinced, Vladimir converts to Orthodox Christianity in 988, and a mass baptism of his people follows in the Dnieper River. This single event is monumental. It brings the vast realm of the Rus into the Byzantine cultural and religious sphere. The Cyrillic alphabet, Byzantine art, and Orthodox Christianity become the foundations of Russian culture, shaping its identity for the next 1,000 years and beyond. The legacy of this conversion is still profoundly felt today in the religious and cultural landscape of Eastern Europe. The Macedonian dynasty didn't just expand the empire's borders, it expanded the very world of Orthodox Christendom. So, as we stand at the end of Basil II's reign, the Byzantine Empire seems invincible. It's wealthy, militarily dominant, culturally brilliant, and its influence stretches far beyond its borders. It has truly reclaimed its status as the heir to Rome, a beacon of civilization in a tumultuous world. But, as we've learned throughout this series, in history, no peak lasts forever. The very success of the Macedonian age sowed the seeds of future problems. What happens when a string of less capable rulers follows a giant like Basil II? Join me next time as we explore the beginning of the end, the challenges that arise, and the arrival of a new, formidable enemy from the east, the Seljuk Turks. We arrive at a truly pivotal and tragic chapter, the beginning of the end. We're talking about a storm from the east and a supposed salvation from the west that would ultimately seal the empire's fate. Imagine the year is 1071. The Byzantine Empire, though facing its share of challenges, still stands as a formidable power. But on the plains of Manzikert, in eastern Anatolia, everything is about to change. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes leads his grand army against the Seljuk Turks, a new and aggressive power sweeping in from Central Asia, led by their brilliant Sultan Alp Arslan. The details of the battle are debated by historians, but the outcome is undisputed, a catastrophic Byzantine defeat. It wasn't just a military loss. It was a psychological and strategic disaster. The emperor himself was captured, a humiliation unheard of for centuries. The Byzantine army was shattered, and the empire's defensive frontier in the east collapsed like a house of cards. Anatolia, the very heartland of the empire, was now wide open. This was the breadbasket, the primary recruiting ground for soldiers, the core of Byzantine strength for 700 years. In the years following Manzikert, Turkish horsemen poured into the region, not just raiding, but settling. City after city fell. The demographic and cultural landscape of Anatolia began to transform, shifting from a Greek-speaking Christian heartland to what would eventually become the Turkish homeland we know today. The empire was hemorrhaging its most vital territory, and it seemed powerless to stop the bleeding. Desperate times call for desperate measures. The Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I Komnenos, a shrewd and capable ruler who had clawed his way to power amidst the chaos, knew he couldn't face the Turks alone. He needed elite, mercenary soldiers. So he looked west to the Pope in Rome and the martial lords of Western Europe. He sent a plea for help. What Alexios likely envisioned was a contingent of well-armed knights, professional soldiers, who would fight for Byzantine gold and under his command. What he got was something entirely different, something bigger and more chaotic than anyone could have ever imagined. The First Crusade. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a fiery sermon at Clermont, calling on the knights of Christendom to cease their squabbling, take up the cross, and march east to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The response was overwhelming. It wasn't just knights who answered the call, but a massive, unwieldy migration of nobles, peasants, fanatics, and adventurers, all heading for Constantinople. When these massive crusader armies began arriving at the gates of Constantinople, the Byzantines were stunned. This wasn't the disciplined mercenary force Alexios had hoped for. It was a chaotic, religiously fervent movement with its own leaders and its own agenda. A deep cultural and political chasm immediately opened up. The Byzantines saw the Crusaders as uncultured, greedy, and untrustworthy barbarians. The Crusaders, in turn, saw the Byzantines as effeminate, treacherous, and not proper Christians due to their different religious practices. Despite this mutual suspicion, a fragile alliance was forged. The Crusaders swore oaths to Alexios, promising to return any formerly Byzantine lands they reconquered from the Turks. And initially, it worked, sort of. With Byzantine logistical support, the First Crusade successfully captured key cities like Nicaea and Antioch, and, against all odds, conquered Jerusalem in 1099. But the seeds of conflict were sown deep. The Crusaders established their own independent states in the Levant, the Crusader kingdoms, and often refused to hand over territory to the Byzantines as promised. The relationship devolved into a complex dance of temporary alliances, broken promises, and outright hostility. For the next century, Byzantines and Crusaders would fight alongside each other one moment and against each other the next. The help from the West had become a new, unpredictable threat on the empire's doorstep. The cure, it seemed, was becoming as dangerous as the disease. But the deepest betrayal was yet to come. Fast forward a century to the year 1204. The Fourth Crusade is launched, with the initial goal of attacking Egypt, the heart of Muslim power. However, a toxic cocktail of financial problems, Venetian commercial ambitions, and Byzantine political intrigue would divert this crusade to a horrifying new target. The Crusaders, deep in debt to the Venetians who had provided their transport fleet, were persuaded to first attack the Christian city of Zara on the Adriatic coast to pay off their dues. This was already a shocking act. But then, a deposed Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, arrived at their camp with a tempting offer: help him reclaim his throne in Constantinople, and he would pay off their entire debt, fund their crusade to the Holy Land, and submit the Byzantine Church to the authority of the Pope. The temptation was too great. The Crusader army, transported by the Venetian fleet, sailed not for Egypt, but for the magnificent capital of the Christian East. In 1203, they successfully installed their pretender on the throne. But the new emperor couldn't possibly fulfill his outrageous promises to the Crusaders. The populace of Constantinople despised him and his Western backers. He was soon overthrown and killed. The Crusaders, feeling betrayed and now stranded outside the city walls without their promised payment, made a decision that would stain the history of Christendom forever. In April of 1204, they turned their full fury on Constantinople itself. For 3 days, the city was subjected to a horrific sack. The soldiers of the Cross, who had sworn to protect Christendom, ran riot. They pillaged palaces and churches, massacred civilians, and destroyed priceless works of art and literature that had been preserved for 1,000 years. Ancient statues were melted down for bronze, holy relics were stolen and shipped back to the West, and the great library of Constantinople was put to the torch, its accumulated knowledge of a millennium turned to ash. This wasn't a battle. It was a frenzy of destruction. The city that had been the light of the world was plunged into darkness by its supposed Christian brethren. The Byzantine Empire was shattered. The Crusaders and Venetians carved up its territories, establishing a Latin empire in Constantinople. Byzantine nobles fled, setting up small successor states in exile, vowing to one day reclaim their capital. While the Byzantines would eventually recapture Constantinople in 1261, the empire would never be the same. The sack of 1204 was a mortal wound from which it could never truly recover. The wealth was gone, the population was decimated, and the territories were fractured. The once mighty Roman Empire was now a shadow of its former self, a small, weakened state surrounded by enemies. The betrayal of the Fourth Crusade broke not just the city, but the very spirit of Byzantium, creating an irreparable schism between Eastern and Western Christianity and leaving the empire vulnerable to its final fall. The unraveling of this great empire is a powerful lesson in unintended consequences and the dangers of betrayal. We witnessed the heart-wrenching sack of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade. Today, we enter the final act, a long and somber twilight that stretches for 2 centuries, culminating in the dramatic fall of a city that had stood for over 1,000 years. In 1261, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness. The exiled Byzantine general, Alexios Strategopoulos, accomplished the seemingly impossible. With a small force, he managed to sneak into Constantinople and recapture the city from its Latin rulers. When the emperor, Michael VIII Palaiologos, returned, he wept with joy. The Roman Empire, it seemed, was reborn. But this was a fragile, hollow victory. The empire that Michael now ruled was a ghost of its former self. It was a small, impoverished state, surrounded by powerful and ambitious neighbors. The glorious city he had reclaimed was a shadow of its former magnificence, depopulated and scarred by decades of neglect and looting. The restored empire was a flickering candle flame, desperately trying to stay lit in a gathering storm. The Palaiologan dynasty, the last to rule Byzantium, faced an impossible task. They were like custodians of a grand crumbling museum, trying to patch up the roof while the foundations were washing away. Internally, the empire was racked by devastating civil wars. Brothers fought brothers, fathers fought sons for the title of emperor, a title that controlled less and less territory with each passing conflict. These wars drained the treasury, destroyed the farmlands, and left the empire critically vulnerable. While the Byzantines were tearing themselves apart, their enemies were circling. The Serbs and Bulgarians were carving out their own empires in the Balkans, seizing Byzantine lands. In the West, Venice and Genoa controlled Byzantium's trade and naval power, treating the once mighty empire like a client state. But the most formidable threat was rising from the east. A new power emerged from the Anatolian frontier, the Ottoman Turks. Led by a series of brilliant and ruthless sultans, the Ottomans were not just raiders, they were master state builders. They were organized, disciplined, and driven by a powerful sense of destiny. Unlike previous enemies, they didn't just conquer. They settled, integrated, and built a new, dynamic society on the lands they took. Starting in the early 14th century, they began to methodically, relentlessly, swallow the remaining Byzantine territories in Asia Minor. Cities that had been Greek and Christian for a millennium, like Nicaea and Nicomedia, fell one by one. The sea that had once been a Roman lake now separated the capital from its lost Anatolian heartland. The Ottoman advance was terrifyingly swift. By the mid-14th century, they crossed the Dardanelles and gained their first foothold in Europe. Gallipoli became their launching pad for the conquest of the Balkans. They bypassed Constantinople, leaving the great city isolated, an island in a sea of Ottoman territory. The once sprawling empire was reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople itself, a few scattered holdings in Greece, and the desperate hope of help from the West. Emperors like John V and Manuel II Palaeologos became weary travelers, crisscrossing Europe, begging for aid from the Pope and Western kings. They offered the one thing they had left to bargain with, the submission of the Orthodox Church to the authority of Rome. But the promised crusades never materialized in any meaningful way, and the union of the churches was fiercely resisted by their own people, who famously declared, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's tiara." By the 1440s, the situation was beyond desperate. The Sultan was Murad II, a formidable ruler who had crushed the last major Christian coalition at the Battle of Varna. It was clear that the final confrontation was imminent. In 1449, a new emperor ascended the fragile throne. His name was Constantine XI Palaeologos. He was a brave and experienced soldier, a man universally respected for his integrity and courage. He knew the impossible odds he faced. He knew he was likely to be the last Roman emperor. Yet he was determined to face his destiny with the dignity and resolve befitting his ancient title. He was the heir of Augustus, Constantine the Great, and Justinian, and he would not let their legacy end with a whimper. Across the Bosporus, a new sultan came to power in 1451. He was just 21 years old, but he possessed an iron will, a brilliant intellect, and a single all-consuming obsession: the conquest of Constantinople. His name was Mentu, known to history as Mem the Conqueror. To him, Constantinople was not just a strategic prize. It was the red apple, the ultimate symbol of imperial power, the prophesied jewel of his new empire. He immediately began preparations for the final siege, constructing a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosporus to cut off any potential aid to the city. His greatest asset was a new terrifying weapon of war: massive cannons, engineered by a Hungarian cannon founder named Orban. One of these behemoths, the basilic, was so large it took 60 oxen to move and could fire a 1,200-pound stone ball over a mile. The ancient walls of Theodosius, which had protected the city for 1,000 years, were about to face their deadliest test. In April 1453, the siege began. Mem's army, numbering somewhere between 80,000 and 200,000 men, surrounded the city. Inside, Constantine XI had perhaps 7,000 defenders, a mix of his own Byzantine soldiers, a contingent of brave Genoese mercenaries led by the heroic Giovanni Justiniani, and a handful of other volunteers. The disparity was staggering. For 53 days, this small band of heroes performed miracles. They fought on the walls day and night, repairing the damage from the relentless cannon fire, repelling wave after wave of Ottoman assaults. The emperor himself was everywhere, fighting alongside his men, sharing their rations and inspiring them with his own unwavering courage. Mehmed, frustrated by the stubborn defense, devised a masterstroke of military genius. To bypass the massive chain that protected the Golden Horn harbor, he ordered his men to build a greased log road over the hills of Galata. In a single night, they hauled dozens of his smaller ships overland and into the harbor, outflanking the city's naval defenses. The defenders were now stretched even thinner, forced to guard the weaker seawalls as well. Still, they fought on. But supplies were dwindling, and the men were exhausted. The great walls, pounded relentlessly by Mehmed's super cannons, were beginning to crumble. On the night of May 28th, an eerie silence fell over the Ottoman camp. Mehmed had promised his troops 3 days of unlimited plunder if they took the city. Inside, the defenders knew the final assault was coming. A final, solemn Christian service was held in the magnificent Hagia Sophia. Orthodox and Catholic, Greek and Italian put aside their differences and prayed together one last time. Emperor Constantine XI gave a final moving speech to his commanders, urging them to fight to the death for their faith, their families, and the honor of the Roman Empire. Then he rode out to the walls to take his place among his soldiers. Just before dawn on May 29, 1453, the final assault began. The roar of cannons, drums, and trumpets was deafening as tens of thousands of Ottoman troops charged the weakest section of the land walls. The first 2 waves were thrown back with heavy losses, but the defenders were at the limit of their endurance. During the height of the final assault, a small group of Ottoman soldiers found a small, unlocked gate, the Kirkeporta. They scrambled through, climbed a tower, and raised the Ottoman standard. At almost the same time, the Genoese commander, Justiniani, was gravely wounded and had to be carried from the walls, a devastating blow to the morale of the defenders. Panic began to spread. The elite Janissaries breached the main wall, and the defense collapsed. Constantine XI Palaiologos was last seen plunging into the thick of the fighting near the gate of St. Romanus, shedding his imperial regalia to fight and die as a common soldier alongside his men. His body was never definitively identified. He died as the last Roman emperor, a heroic end to an 1100-year story. The fall of Constantinople was a seismic event that shook the world. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, the final chapter of the Roman Empire that had begun with Augustus. It was the end of an entire era. For the next 3 days, the city was subjected to a brutal sack, though Mehmed later put a stop to it, wanting to preserve his new capital. He rode into the city, made his way to the Hagia Sophia, and, looking up at its magnificent dome, ordered it converted into a mosque. A new age had begun. The city of Constantine was now Istanbul, the capital of the mighty Ottoman Empire. The legacy of Byzantium, however, did not die in 1453. The fleeing scholars carried with them the precious knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, helping to fuel the Renaissance in Western Europe. The Orthodox faith, nurtured and protected by the empire for centuries, continued to be a guiding light for millions in Eastern Europe and beyond. The art, the law, and the very idea of a Christian Roman Empire left an indelible mark on the world. The story of Byzantium is a testament to resilience, a civilization that stood as a bridge between the ancient and modern worlds, a beacon of light that shone for over a millennium before its final tragic fall.